The sun had just started rising over the wide Texas valley, spreading a soft golden light on the quiet land. Caleb Morgan stepped out of his old ranch house, the wooden porch creaking under his boots. He had lived here his entire life, on the same land his father and grandfather had cared for. Every morning began the same way. He would walk toward the far fields, check the fences, and make sure the cattle were safe. It was a routine he knew so well that the steps felt like part of his heartbeat. That morning, however, something felt slightly different. Caleb wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the calmness in the air, or the way the wind carried the smell of fresh grass. But he sensed that the day would bring something unusual, something that would not fit into the quiet rhythm he had followed for so many years. He rode his horse, Jasper, slowly along the fence line. Everything seemed peaceful. The land stretched out far in front of him, rolling hills, open sky, and silence so pure that he could hear the distant calls of birds waking up. Caleb breathed in deeply, feeling grateful for the simple life he lived. He didn't need much. The land was enough. As he reached the far corner of his property, he saw something unexpected. A small figure walked near the fence on the other side, moving with an unsure but determined pace. He pulled the reins gently and narrowed his eyes to look closer. It was a young woman, wearing a backpack, a hat, and a field notebook in her hand. She didn't look like someone who belonged to the ranching world. Caleb had seen people like her before: students, travelers, researchers, people who arrived with curiosity in their eyes and questions on their tongue. He clicked his tongue softly, urging Jasper forward. As he came closer, the woman looked up and quickly stepped back, adjusting her glasses. She seemed slightly nervous, though her expression showed she had a reason for being there. "Morning," Caleb said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Morning," she replied, her voice polite but filled with a quiet urgency. "I'm sorry if I'm on your land. I'm just following a signal from a tracker." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Tracker?" She nodded. "I'm a wildlife researcher. My name is Lena Rivera. I'm studying the movement patterns of the wild mustangs in this area." Caleb had heard about the researchers working in the valley, though he never paid them much attention. He respected the land, and he respected the animals, but he believed things should be left alone. Nature had its own way, and humans didn't always need to interfere. "What brings you all the way out here?" he asked. Her eyes shifted to the side, and Caleb followed her gaze. That's when he saw it. A wild mustang, a young, beautiful stallion, lay at the base of the fence, its leg caught in old, tangled barbed wire that had been buried under grass. The horse breathed heavily, unable to stand. Its dark eyes were wide with fear. For a moment, Caleb froze. He had seen situations like this before, long ago when he was a child. His father always said the same thing: wild horses should be left alone. They live by their own rules. Humans should not interfere. It was a belief passed down through generations, a code almost as old as the land itself. Before Caleb could speak, Lena stepped closer to the Mustang, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Oh no. It's worse than I thought." She looked back at Caleb, her expression full of pleading. Please help me free it." Caleb felt the weight of her words. Her voice was soft but carried a strong feeling, the kind that came from someone who truly cared. But he remembered the rule, his father's rule, the rancher's rule, the unwritten law that wild mustangs were not to be touched. They were part of the land, yes, but they were not part of the rancher's responsibility. People in the valley believed that interfering with them only brought trouble or imbalance. Still, the Mustang looked at him with quiet pain. Not anger, not fear, just a deep, helpless ache that reached somewhere inside him he didn't expect. Lena knelt beside the horse but kept a distance, trying to calm it with her soft voice. She didn't touch it. She didn't dare to. She knew how sensitive wild horses were, especially when scared, but she looked up at Caleb again, her eyes shining with both fear and determination. "I can't free it alone," she said. "I don't have the tools, and if we wait too long, it might not make it." Her words weren't dramatic. They were simple and honest. She wasn't trying to convince him for her own sake. She was trying to save a life. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. He wasn't sure what to do. He felt tied between history and the moment in front of him. He heard his father's voice in his head, firm and unbending, but then he heard Lena's trembling voice, gentle but full of heart. "Please," she said again. That single word echoed through him. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't pressure. It was a plea from someone who loved the land in her own way, different from his, but just as sincere. Caleb stepped down from his horse. His boots sank softly into the grass as he approached the fence. The Mustang flinched slightly, but Lena spoke to it again, steady and calm. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're trying to help you." Caleb crouched beside the wire. The tangles were tight, wrapped around the Mustang's leg in a way that looked painful but not hopeless. He examined it carefully, noting how old and rusty the wire was. He had meant to replace sections of this fence months ago, but the work kept piling up. Now, seeing the result of the delay, he felt a quiet ache of guilt. Lena watched him with anticipation. She didn't push him, didn't rush him. She simply waited, trusting that he would do what was right. Caleb stood up again. He looked at the Mustang, then at Lena, then back at the quiet land stretching around them. The world felt still, as if waiting for his choice. In that moment, he realized something. The rule he grew up with, never interfere with wild Mustangs, was built on respect for nature. But respect didn't always mean staying distant. Sometimes respect meant stepping in when something living was suffering through no fault of its own, especially when the harm came from a man-made object like a forgotten piece of wire. He sighed, a long breath that released years of old beliefs. "I'll need my tools," he said softly. Lena's eyes widened with relief. And for the first time that morning, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a gentle, grateful one. But it touched Caleb more than he expected. "I'll stay with the horse," she said. "I'll keep it calm." Caleb nodded. He walked back to Jasper, mounted, and rode quickly toward his barn. The morning light grew brighter behind him, touching the land with warmth. As he rode, he felt something stirring inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was change, maybe it was a new understanding, or maybe it was simply the beginning of a story he never expected to be part of. When he returned with the tools, the Mustang lay still, but its breathing was steadier. Lena sat beside it, speaking softly to comfort it. Caleb approached with careful steps, ready to face the choice he had made. And though he didn't know it yet, this single moment, this quiet, trembling plea, would mark the turning point of everything he believed about the land, the animals, and even himself. Caleb stood beside the injured Mustang with his tools in hand. But before he began cutting the wire, his mind wandered back to memories he had not visited in a long time. The past had a way of returning when he least expected it. The image of his father, tall and strict, rose clearly in his mind that morning. As a child, Caleb often followed his father around the ranch, trying to match his long strides. He remembered walking with him near the wild valleys and seeing wild Mustangs run freely in the distance. His father always paused when the Mustangs appeared, almost out of respect. Then he would place a strong hand on Caleb's shoulder and say the same words each time. "Son, wild horses live by their own laws. We respect them by letting them be." To young Caleb, his father's voice had held the weight of absolute truth. The rule was simple, but it shaped him. Never touch a wild Mustang. Never interfere. Nature knew what it was doing, and humans should stay at a distance. That rule became a boundary in his mind, like the fences he maintained on the ranch. With time, he didn't question it. He simply carried it forward, the way sons often follow the footsteps laid down before them. Now, years later, that memory played like a quiet echo in his ears. Caleb looked at the Mustang lying helplessly on the ground. It twitched its leg weakly as the wire tightened around it. Lena sat near its head, her voice gentle and steady as she tried to keep it calm. She gently brushed the grass aside, but didn't touch the horse directly. She had a natural understanding of animals. one that came from both knowledge and heart. Caleb took a slow breath and knelt again to study the wire. His hesitation wasn't about fear. It was the weight of tradition, the silent pressure of an old belief passed down through generations. Breaking it felt like stepping over a line he wasn't sure he should cross. Lena watched him closely. She was trying to read the conflict on his face, though she didn't say anything at first. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice quiet, but filled with meaning. "You look unsure," she said softly. Caleb didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the wire, adjusting it carefully with his gloves. "This land has rules," he replied. "Rules my father lived by. Rules his father lived by." "I understand," Lena said gently. "But maybe this is one of those moments when rules need to bend, just a little." Caleb gave a faint, tired smile. "You say that like it's easy." Lena shook her head. "It's not easy. But this horse didn't get hurt because of nature. It's stuck in an old fence. That's something humans made. Maybe helping it is the right kind of respect." Her words weren't demanding. They weren't challenging him. They simply offered another way to see things, and they sat in his mind like a small seed of truth. Caleb felt the weight of the moment more deeply than he expected. He pushed the memory of his father aside for a moment and focused on the present. The Mustang's breathing was rough and uneven. Its body trembled slightly. It wasn't wildness he saw anymore, it was vulnerability. Lena rested her hands on her knees and looked out across the land. "When I was in college," she said softly, "I learned that Mustangs are more than symbols of freedom. They're indicators of how healthy the land is. When they struggle, it means something in the ecosystem is changing." Caleb listened quietly. "My research team is trying to understand those changes," she continued. "This Mustang is one of the horses we've been tracking. If we lose him, we lose part of what we're trying to learn." Her voice trembled again, but not from fear. It was emotion, honest and real. Caleb didn't know much about research or tracking devices, but he knew sincerity when he heard it. He glanced at Lena. Her eyes were focused on the Mustang with a kind of care he rarely saw in visitors. There was no self-interest in her expression, no need for praise. She simply wanted to help. He looked again at the trapped leg. The wire had wound itself like a stubborn knot. The Mustang must have struggled for hours. Caleb could see faint marks on the ground from its attempts to free itself. That sight tightened something in his chest. It wasn't right. Not by human standards. Not by nature's standards either. He shifted his position and carefully tested the wire with his pliers. The Mustang jerked slightly, and Lena leaned in, speaking softly to reassure it. Her calmness helped, and the horse settled again. Caleb finally spoke after a long moment. "My father said never to interfere, but he also said to fix what's ours to fix." He tugged gently at the wire. "This fence is mine. This shouldn't have happened." Lena nodded, grateful that he was beginning to see the situation differently. But she didn't pressure him. She knew he needed to reach the decision with his own heart, not hers. Caleb sat back on his heels, wiping his brow. He looked across the quiet valley. The sun was higher now, warming the earth. The world looked peaceful, unaware of the struggle happening in this small corner. He thought of the years he spent maintaining this land. The early mornings, the long days, the quiet nights under open sky. The land was like a companion to him, steady and reliable, but he also knew it changed over time, and perhaps the people living on it needed to change along with it. That idea felt new, a little uncomfortable, but not unwelcome. He stood up and walked to Jasper, the horse he trusted like an old friend. The sight of the calm animal brought him comfort. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a more precise cutting tool. He returned to the fence, took a steady breath, and knelt again. "All right," he said softly, almost to himself. "Let's do this right." Lena didn't cheer or celebrate. She simply nodded with quiet gratitude, sensing how significant this decision was for him. Caleb slipped the tool under the first piece of wire. He moved slowly, carefully. Lena kept talking to the Mustang in a soft tone, telling it everything would be fine. Even though she couldn't be sure, the horse stayed mostly still, as if understanding that help was near. As Caleb worked, he thought more about rules. Rules had shaped his life. They had kept him grounded. But sometimes, life presented moments that didn't fit inside the old ways. Maybe his father would understand that. Maybe he wouldn't. Caleb would never know. But he did know one thing clearly. The horse needed him now. And turning away wasn't an option he could live with. He made the final cut on the first piece of wire, and it loosened slightly. The Mustang let out a soft, trembling breath. Not of fear, more of relief. That small change in the animal's behavior encouraged Caleb. He continued slowly, methodically, freeing one loop of wire at a time. Lena watched every movement with hopeful eyes. In the quiet space between breeze and birdsong, the air felt charged with meaning. Caleb realized he wasn't just cutting wire, he was cutting through years of rigid thinking, making room for something new, something better. He wasn't breaking a rule because he didn't care. He was breaking it because he finally understood the heart behind it. And understanding, he realized, was better than blind obedience. Caleb positioned himself beside the Mustang, keeping his movements slow and careful. The morning sun was higher now, warming the grass around them. The quiet sound of wind brushed through the valley, and birds called softly from distant trees. It was a peaceful place, yet the moment felt heavy with meaning. Caleb understood that what he was about to do was more than a simple act of freeing a trapped animal. It was a decision that pushed against everything he had believed for years. Lena sat close to the Mustang's head, speaking in a soft tone that seemed to calm not just the animal, but the air around them. The Mustang's ears twitched as it listened to her voice. Its breathing was uneven but no longer panicked. It was as if the animal sensed that help had finally come. Caleb studied the tangle of wire again. The loops were tight, wrapped around the Mustang's leg like a stubborn knot. He tested the first piece gently. It was rusty and sharp, but not impossible to cut. He took a slow breath, steadied himself, and slipped the cutting tool under the wire. Lena watched him closely. She didn't say anything that might distract him. She understood how delicate the moment was. Caleb needed a quiet mind, a steady hand. Even a small mistake could make the horse more frightened. He applied pressure to the tool. The wire snapped with a soft metallic sound. At that moment, the Mustang flinched, its muscles tightening, but Lena quickly whispered calming words, and the animal settled again. Caleb paused, giving it a moment to relax before moving to the next loop. With each piece of wire he cut, he felt something shift inside him. It was strange, like a weight lifting, though he hadn't known he was carrying one. His father's old rule had always been like a fence around his thoughts. But now, by helping this Mustang, he was slowly stepping beyond it, realizing the world was not as simple as the boundaries he grew up with. "You're doing good," Lena said quietly, offering him a small, encouraging smile. Caleb nodded, not looking away from his work. "Just need to be patient," he replied. Horses can sense panic. He wasn't just saying it, he believed it. Animals understood energy better than words. His calmness mattered. The second loop of wire was more challenging. It was twisted tightly and half buried in the dirt. Caleb had to dig around it carefully, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle the Mustang. The horse's leg trembled, but Lena stroked the grass near its face, whispering softly. Her voice worked like a soothing blanket. Caleb finally freed the second piece. The tension around the Mustang's leg loosened further. A faint sigh escaped the horse, a sound so quiet and soft that it moved Caleb deeply. He hadn't realized how much pain the animal had been holding in until it released that small breath of relief. "You see that?" Lena whispered. "It trusts you." Caleb shook his head slightly. "I don't know about trust," he said. "Maybe it just knows we're trying to help." Lena smiled. "That's the same thing, isn't it?" He didn't answer, but her words lingered in his mind. Caleb moved on to the final piece of wire. It was the thickest one, wrapped tightly around the Mustang's lower leg. The horse's skin was pinched slightly under the pressure. Though thankfully not broken, Caleb felt a quiet sadness as he studied the wound. This wasn't nature's doing. It was the consequence of something man-made, something he should have repaired long ago. "I should have fixed this fence earlier," he murmured to himself. "You didn't know," Lena said softly. "No one can watch every corner of the land all the time." Caleb appreciated her gentle understanding. But still, he felt responsible. The Mustang wasn't just suffering because of an accident. It was suffering because of something left unnoticed. He positioned the tool carefully under the last piece of wire. "This one might make the horse jump," he warned. "I'll be here," Lena said, placing her hand on the grass near the Mustang's head again, her voice ready and steady. Caleb squeezed the handles of the cutter firmly. The wire resisted at first, refusing to give way. He adjusted his grip, took a deep breath, and tried again. This time, the metal snapped. The Mustang jerked its leg instinctively. Lena whispered quickly, gently, and the horse settled again. It was finally free. Caleb stepped back slightly, letting the Mustang feel the new freedom in its leg. It stayed still for a few seconds, as if trying to understand what had changed. Then, slowly, carefully, it pushed its weight onto the freed leg. It wobbled, unsure at first. "Easy," Caleb whispered. Though he wasn't sure if he said it for the Mustang or himself, the Mustang shifted again, testing its balance. Its leg trembled, but it held. Then, with a slow, shaky movement, the horse lifted its head. For a brief moment, it looked directly at Caleb. The gaze lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds felt incredibly long. The Mustang's dark eyes were filled with something Caleb wasn't expecting, something like gratitude, or understanding, or perhaps simply quiet acknowledgement. Lena watched the exchange with awe. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. He felt a strange tightness in his chest, not painful, but emotional, like something deep inside him had been touched. The Mustang shifted again, then pushed itself up. It struggled at first, its legs trembling under its weight. Caleb moved back quickly, giving it space. Lena did the same. Slowly, the Mustang rose to its feet, shaky but determined. It stood there for several seconds, breathing heavily. Its body was still weak, but it no longer looked helpless. The wind lifted its mane gently. With another small glance at Caleb and Lena, the Mustang turned its head toward the open valley. It took a slow step, another. Then, gathering its strength, it limped forward, moving toward the hills. Caleb and Lena watched silently as the Mustang made its way into the distance. It wasn't running, not yet. But it was free, moving on its own, leaving behind the wire that had trapped it. Lena exhaled deeply, almost in relief. "We did it," she said quietly. Caleb felt a warm feeling spread through him, pride. Yes, but also something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of doing something meaningful. Something right. "It'll heal," Lena added. "I'll come back and check on it in a few days." Caleb looked at her. "You think it'll be all right?" She nodded with confidence. "Horses are strong. And you freed it in time. It has a good chance." He felt relief wash over him. The morning had been long, challenging, and emotional. But it had ended with hope. As they walked back toward the fence, Caleb gathered the broken pieces of wire. He didn't want to leave anything behind that could hurt another animal. Lena helped him, even though he told her she didn't have to. When they finished, Caleb looked out over the valley again. The land felt different, somehow not changed, but more alive. More connected to him than before. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe his father's rules weren't meant to remain frozen forever. Maybe rules could grow, just like people did. "You did a good thing today," Lena said softly beside him. Caleb looked at her, then back at the open valley. "We did," he corrected. They stood there, in quiet understanding. Somewhere, far in the distance, the Mustang had disappeared into the hills, its freedom restored. Caleb didn't know what this choice would mean for his future or how the ranching community might react later. But in this moment, he felt no regret at all. Helping the Mustang felt right, and sometimes, doing what's right mattered more than following an old rule. The next few days passed quietly on the ranch, but something inside Caleb felt different. He continued his usual routine, checking the fences, feeding the cattle, repairing tools, but every time he looked toward the hills, he found himself wondering about the Mustang. Had it joined its herd again? Was it healing well? Was it safe? He didn't usually spend this much time thinking about wild animals. Ranch life had taught him to keep a respectful distance. But the moment he freed that Mustang had stayed with him in a way he couldn't shake. It wasn't only about breaking the old rule. It was about the way the Mustang had looked at him before limping away, a quiet moment that held more meaning than words. On the third afternoon, he heard the sound of a truck pulling up to his house. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on a towel. Lena climbed out of the truck, holding her field notebook and a small cooler. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said with a gentle smile. "You're not," Caleb replied. "I guess you're here about the Mustang?" She nodded. "I tracked the signal this morning. It stayed near the ridge, not too far from where we freed it. I thought you might like to come with me, if you have time." Caleb wasn't the type to easily rearrange his day, but her request felt important. "Let me saddle Jasper," he said. "I'll meet you by the gate." They rode together toward the ridge, Lena in her truck and Caleb on Jasper. The wind was mild, carrying the scent of sagebrush. The ground was warm under the afternoon sun, and the sky stretched wide above them, open and calm, like it always was in the valley. As they approached the ridge, Lena parked the truck and grabbed her binoculars. She checked the tracker again. "It's close," she said. "Just a little further." Caleb followed her on foot. They walked quietly through tall grass, careful not to disturb anything around them. It wasn't long before they saw movement in the distance. "There," Lena whispered, pointing. The Mustang stood near a cluster of bushes, its coat shining softly under the sun. It was grazing quietly, lifting its head every now and then to listen to the wind. Caleb felt relief wash over him. The horse was standing on all four legs. It still limped slightly, but the wound no longer looked tight or painful. "It's healing," Lena said, smiling. "Better than I expected." Caleb studied the animal with a soft expression. "Looks like it's got its strength back." They watched silently for several minutes. The Mustang flicked its tail, shook its mane, and took a few steps as if testing its leg. It didn't seem frightened. It didn't seem weak. It was just free. After a while, it noticed them. But instead of running away, it simply raised its head and looked at them. The moment lasted only a breath, but it felt peaceful. When the Mustang finally trotted off into the hills, Caleb and Lena began walking back toward the truck. "It must feel good," Lena said, seeing it heal. "It does," Caleb replied. "More than I expected." Lena glanced at him. "You know, a lot of ranchers don't want to work with researchers like me. They think we're trying to tell them how to run their land." Caleb gave a small nod. "They're protective. Old habits run deep around here." "What about you?" she asked softly. "What do you think now?" Caleb looked at the land stretching around them, the hills, the grass, the fences, and the open sky. "I think maybe we could understand each other better. Maybe we're not as different as we thought." Lena's smile widened. "That's all I ever wanted, to work with people like you, not against them." When they reached the truck, she opened her cooler. Inside were small medical supplies, antiseptic spray, bandage wraps, and a portable tracking reader. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know you carried half a clinic with you." She laughed lightly. "When you work with wild animals, you learn to prepare for anything." There was an easy comfort between them now, something that hadn't been there before. Both understood that the Mustang had built a bridge between their worlds, her research and his ranching. When Caleb got home later that evening, he received a call from his neighbor, Ron, an elder rancher who had lived in the valley even longer than Caleb. "I heard you got involved with a wild Mustang the other day," Ron said. His tone carried curiosity more than judgment. Caleb paused. "Word travels fast. Sure does, Ron replied. People are talking. Some folks think you're stepping into things best left alone. Caleb leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the fields. Maybe so. But I couldn't leave the horse like that. There was silence on the other end. Then a slow exhale. Well, maybe you did the right thing. Hard to say. The times are changing. Land ain't what it used to be. Caleb sensed something in the man's voice, a mix of hesitation and understanding. Even the older ranchers were beginning to see the world shift around them. Nothing stayed the same forever, not the land, not the people, not the rules. Maybe we all need to change a little, Caleb said gently. Ron chuckled softly. Maybe you're right. After the call ended, Caleb stood outside for a long while, watching the sun dip behind the hills. He thought about the Mustang again, about the rule he broke, and about Lena's hopeful eyes when she talked about her research. He didn't regret a thing. In the days that followed, Lena returned to the ranch more often. Sometimes she checked the tracker. Sometimes she simply talked with Caleb about her work. He found himself listening with real interest. She explained how the wild herds moved through the valley, how the changing weather patterns affected them, and how modern research could help protect their natural freedom. What we want, she said one afternoon, is not to control them. It's to understand them, so they can survive with us, not against us. Caleb nodded slowly, seeing the truth in her words. Sounds like a good goal. Most things in nature work better when we cooperate, she added. Caleb felt something shift inside him again, something like respect. Not just for Lena, but for the work she represented. He had never taken the time to see things from her perspective before. One morning, Lena brought a small drone. It helps me study patterns from above, she explained. Would you like to see? Caleb hesitated at first. He wasn't comfortable with new gadgets. But Lena waited patiently. And eventually he stepped closer. She launched the drone into the sky. A small screen showed a live view of the valley from above. Caleb stared at the image, amazed at how different the land looked from such a height. He could see the gentle curves of the hills, the winding paths animals had created over time, and even tiny moving dots, likely mustangs grazing far away. That's amazing, he said quietly. Lena smiled. This is how we learn where to set protective zones. It helps us understand their natural routes. We reported os. Our maybe along sever one down. Our maybe along seven dos. Caleb felt a sense of wonder. So this is how you see the land. And this, she said softly, pointing at the screen, is how you help protect it. The rancher inside him felt proud. The world was larger than the rules he grew up with, and now he was beginning to see it from a new angle, literally and figuratively. But not everyone was pleased. A few ranchers began asking questions, some curious, some doubtful. So you're working with that researcher now? One man asked at the feed store. Heard you're helping her track horses, said another, raising an eyebrow. Caleb answered them calmly. I'm learning, that's all. Some nodded with interest. Others exchanged quiet glances. Change had always made people uncomfortable at first. But Caleb didn't feel shaken. Each time he saw the Mustang limping a little less, standing a little taller, he felt sure he had made the right choice. And each time Lena showed him something new about the land, the herds, or the quiet way nature communicated, Caleb felt something growing inside him. Not regret, not doubt, understanding. A word that meant more to him now than all the rules he had carried for years. Part 5 begins with a soft morning light spreading across the wide valley. Caleb stands near the wooden fence, looking at the open land in front of him. His eyes follow the Mustang herd, moving slowly through the tall grass. It has been many months since the day he helped free the injured Mustang. Time has passed, but the memory of that moment remains fresh in his mind. He remembers the trembling voice of Lena, her concern for the animal, and the way the wounded Mustang looked back at them before running away. That single moment changed something deep inside him. Even if he didn't understand it fully at the time, now the once injured Mustang is stronger than ever. It runs with the herd again, its movements full of energy and freedom. Every time Caleb sees it, A warm feeling rises in his chest. He does not consider himself a hero, or anything like that. He simply knows he did something kind that day. Something that felt right and honest, and that feeling has quietly shaped many of his decisions since then. Lena arrives at the ranch just as the sun climbs higher. Her old truck pulls up near the barn, and as always, she steps out with a notebook in one hand and a soft smile on her face. Over the months, she has visited many times, both to check on the Mustang and to continue her research work. But more than that, she has come to respect Caleb deeply, even though he grew up with beliefs completely different from hers. Caleb greets her with his usual calm voice, and they both stand side by side, watching the herd move freely. Lena points out a few new markings on the horses, explaining how the season has affected them. Caleb listens with genuine interest. Months ago, he would have stood quietly without caring much about these details. But Lena's passion has slowly opened his eyes. He now sees the land not only as a place to protect but also as a home shared by many creatures who depend on it. They walk along the fence line together. The air is fresh, carrying the crisp smell of grass and soil. Birds sing from the nearby trees, and the gentle sound of the horses' hooves mixes with the wind. Lena tells Caleb that the Mustang herd is healthier this year because the ranch has become a safer path for them. She explains that the open spaces on his land help the animals move easily between grazing areas without facing new fences or traps. Caleb nods thoughtfully. Hearing that his land makes a difference gives him a quiet sense of pride. He never imagined he would become someone who contributed to wildlife conservation. Yet here he stands part of something meaningful, almost without trying. As they continue walking, Lena thanks him again for breaking the old rule months ago. Caleb smiles softly and tells her he no longer sees it as breaking a rule. Instead, he sees it as choosing kindness when kindness was needed. He admits that his father's ways shaped him, but even his father would have agreed that saving a life is never the wrong choice. Later in the day, they drive out to a distant hill where Lena has set up some tracking equipment. Caleb helps her carry the heavier items and holds things in place while she adjusts her tools. Their teamwork feels natural now, like they have been doing this for years. Lena explains how her project uses small, harmless tags to understand Mustang movements. She talks about how such research can protect the herd's future. Caleb asks more questions than he ever did before, surprising even himself. He wants to understand, not because he feels obligated but because he truly cares. The more he learns, the more he realizes how much the land has been changing and how important it is to protect every living thing on it. As the evening light begins to soften, they sit under a tall oak tree to rest. The sky shifts into shades of orange and pink. They watch the Mustang herd from afar. Caleb notices the once injured Mustang running playfully with two others. Its coat shines under the setting sun, and its steps look strong and steady. Seeing it like this fills Caleb with a peaceful satisfaction he had not felt in years. Lena shares with him that their conservation project has grown since she first arrived. More people are getting involved, more landowners are offering to help, and scientists are paying attention to the valley again. She tells him that his support gave the project unexpected strength. His decision, even if it seemed small at the time, encouraged others to rethink old practices. A single act, she reminds him, sometimes leads to bigger change than anyone could imagine. Caleb sits quietly, thinking about her words. He always believed that change came from big plans or long talks. But now he sees how one moment, one decision to listen to someone's trembling voice can set a whole new path in motion. It humbles him and warms him at the same time. Before they leave the hill, Lena asks him if he would consider becoming an official partner in the Wildlife Corridor project. Caleb looks toward his land, stretching out wide and peaceful. He thinks about the generations before him, about the traditions that shaped him, and about the possibility of a future where old ideas blend with new ones. After a long breath, he agrees. Not because he wants attention or recognition, but because it feels right, just as freeing the Mustang felt right months ago. In the following weeks, Caleb works closely with Lena's team. He helps map out safe paths for animals. He studies the flow of water, the growth of grass, and even how weather changes affect the valley. He learns things he never paid attention to before and finds himself enjoying every moment. His neighbors notice the changes too. Some ask questions, some express surprise, but many of them begin seeing the value in what he is doing. A few even ask how they can help. The valley shifts slowly but surely. New conversations start. Old barriers soften. People begin caring not only for their ranches but also for the wild animals that share the land with them. Caleb watches all this happen with quiet gratitude. He does not take credit for it. But deep inside, he knows the truth. This change began the day he heard Lena whisper, "Please, free it," with fear and hope mixed in her voice. One cool morning, Caleb and Lena ride horseback together along the ridge. The sun rises softly behind them, painting the valley in a gentle golden glow. They stop at the highest point and look down at the Mustang herd grazing peacefully. The once injured Mustang lifts its head and gazes in their direction. For a moment, the world feels still and deeply connected. Caleb feels a rare moment of understanding wash over him. The land is the same, yet everything feels different. He realizes that traditions can remain meaningful while still making space for new ways. He understands that compassion brings people together, and he knows that sometimes breaking a rule is not an act of rebellion but an act of respect for life, for hope, and for the future. As the wind moves gently through the grass, Caleb takes a slow breath and feels at peace. The valley is alive, free, and full of promise. And for the first time in many years, he feels the same way.